compliance banner are used to solve their business problems and make their managers and senior managers happy. And the final bit, which is kind of like counterbalances the whining approach, is the one where you take some kind of a prioritized approach. Not always the council's guidance for prioritized control implementation, but you have some kind of a project plan or a task list in the simple case, which gives you an ability to eat the elephant chunk by chunk. I mean, for some companies, PCI is an elephant. I was talking to a company that had a global distributed flat network, which is a dream for all the assessors, as Branden can attest.
Yeah, it's easy, right? Fail, done.
And so for this kind of company, it's not so much eating the elephant, it might be eating a dinosaur or eating some kind of a alien monster because it's even bigger. And this is the right way to do it, is to start checking at it. You want to add something fun?
No, not for this one.
Okay.
Gotta save my fun.
So this has the dark side. Well, this was already pretty dark, but it has a darker side. Namely, PCI is just an easy thing. And this has an interesting one. Yesterday, I had one of the most blatant examples. I was reading some of the merchant blogs, not the security blogs, but more of a merchant blogs. And there was a quote from a merchant who was attesting to a certain PCI provider, and he said, "Thank you to provider XYZ. One phone call, and they made us compliant in 5 minutes." That was really, the highlight of yesterday for me, despite this fun conference, because it is actually smacks of some supernatural powers, in fact, maybe godlike powers, if you can make somebody compliant in 5 minutes over the phone. So despite that, there are companies who consider PCI to be very easy. You just have to answer a bunch of questions, yes, and then you get scanned by an approved scanning vendor, and then they're done. Now, this certainly is limited to smaller companies, but guess what? This has an equivalent practice among larger companies, and that's the famous, or rather infamous practice of QSA shopping. How many here actually know what's QSA shopping, and how do you QSA shop? Okay, that's a bad sign. So in any case, so there's a QSA shopping has a positive side, but let me talk about the negative side. That's when you're a merchant, you want to do an assessment, you invite a bunch of QSAs in a room, and you ask them questions about some hypothetical environment, which is typically yours. And you say, well, how about this hypothetical merchant does things this way? Would it be compliant? And then you pick the QSA who answers yes to the majority of those questions. And that's kind of a fun practice, which is aimed at getting out of the whole PCI thing as easily as possible. Finally, trying to pretend that PCI project is something you do in March, and then you do it again in 3 months, and then a couple more times in a year, and then the rest of the time you just don't think about this. This typically ends up with all sorts of hilarious results, starting from breaches and ending with other consequences. Now, what's the right way of doing the same thing? And this, obviously, these are examples which are too common to even list here. When you start with a project, there is likely a gap between your current environment and what would be implementation of PCI controls in the same environment. So there's a way to analyze the gap and then figure out how you'd start shrinking the gap in an ongoing basis and then maintaining the absence of a gap. And then the light side of QSA shopping is simply picking the QSA who has experience with a similar businesses, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a perfectly legitimate practice, and I've seen hotels picking QSAs who has assessed hotels and service providers picking QSAs who assess service providers. This is not the same as picking the QSA who answers yes to the largest number of questions in a smallest amount of time. This practice is perfectly legit, and I've seen companies who would just flat out reject QSAs that make unreasonable demands. Hey, you have to buy a DLP box from my parent company kind of thing. That's a perfectly appropriate QSA to show the door. And then at the same time, the way to do things right is to try to allocate some time for actually ongoing practice of PCI DSS maintenance. And that's kind of a thing that will hopefully help you in case of a data breach, because it is a very controversial practice of whether your compliance would be deemed to be lacking at the time of a breach. But if you do make an effort to maintain it as opposed to do it every quarter, there is a chance, at least in my opinion, that you will be assessed as compliant at the time of the breach, even though that hasn't happened yet. Any fun additions to this one?
No, I think the QSA shopping one is kind of the big one on when you're looking for an answer. I mean, it's okay to, I definitely say interview your QSA. Make them send somebody or make you talk to somebody, put it in the contract. Now, on the other side, I'm going to tell you, I hate it when people do that. I really hate that because that means you've got to pull somebody out of the field, get on the phone with you. But if it helps you make sure that you've got the right person who understands your business, ultimately, you don't want somebody making a recommendation that breaks your business because then you have a bigger problem. How do I fix this? How am I supposed to tell my CFO they're going to shut down this website that's 40% of our business? Can't do that.
Yeah.
You said that at the point of breach, no company has ever been found to be compliant. But is that a result of when we come in and do the evaluation, will they go through your assessment of compliance with home and find something that's not compliant? Because I feel like they have to find something, otherwise they're standing, do it.
Well, all right, so yes, that is the common in the industry, like 250 requirements, of course you're going to find something out of place, because maybe you didn't give me a visitor badge when I walked in the door, because I was trying to get you to put up the fire out, so yes. However, usually it starts from the forensics. So, for example, I did an investigation, or helped lead an investigation for a very large, significant breach, and it took us a while to figure out where the thing came from. Why? Because there was no logging. So that's like kind of a big clue. If it takes a while to find it, hey, there's some problems there. There's no logging. We had to image over 7 terabytes of data before we figured out it was a BlackBerry server that caused the problem, the network. So if the breaches that have occurred, it's usually because the scope was not set right. People hide things from QSAs. QSAs do a bad job. It's really, the whole point of this is that it's supposed to be a partnership. Your QSA and the merchant or service provider both have skin in the game. And you both have to do it from a partnership perspective. If you treat a QSA like an auditor, they're going to ask closed-ended questions, yes or no answers. You're not going to get very far.
I think what it feels like, though, is like it's impossible to maintain compliance. I know, when you get your SAP deal at point in time, it feels as though it's impossible to maintain and almost not even worth it because if you attempt and spend resources on trying to maintain that, and you do suffer a breach, you're going to find something that you did wrong and find anyway.
So here's the question that I'd ask you. I'm not picking on you, but you asked the question, so I'm going to ask you this question. What makes you qualified to accept and process credit cards? If you're a retailer, right? If you're a retailer, you're a marketing company and you get stuff on the shelves and out the door. Get people to, give away their money, or now with the new fancy, near field cards, my wife just kind of walks around the store with the credit card and stuff shows up in the basket and she walks out, right? That's the idea, is to get them in and out. But if you're a merchant, the reason why you process your own cards is because there was an MBA. I'm an MBA. So there was an MBA in the 1980s or 90s that said, hey, you can get some revenue out of this. Look at this. You're paying 5% to outsource all this stuff. You can pay 3%, and we just do an investment. You pay this back in 3 years. You're set. The climate was much different. So not that the MBA was an idiot. He could have been, right? I'm an idiot sometimes. It happens. But the whole point is that today there's enough tools from a risk perspective. I don't know if I'd process anymore. If I'm setting up a business, outsource it all, and it's not that expensive. And quite frankly, if you look at the other standards that are out there and the other types of data that are probably in your organization, this isn't that scary. There's stuff that's way scarier than this that's out there. So, but you're right, for smaller merchants, even for larger ones, every day, you mean I have to do this every single day? How am I supposed to? I've got, one of my merchants that I used to work with, 2 million employees. Probably tells you who it is, but how am I supposed to get 2 million employees marching to the same beat every single day? It's almost impossible. Just got to take the risk out, scope it down.
Yeah. But that's kind of the whole question of different standard of diligence during the routine assessment and during the post-incident assessment is kind of, it might be somewhat unfair, but at the same time, it's also, you already have evidence, proven evidence that the company has failed to the attacker, right? So there is a chance that they've done everything right. But it's hard for you to sort of, if you're an assessor, to switch to the mindset of, okay, so they've done everything right, they've got breached, let's prove they've done everything right. That's a little uncomfortable, right, when you're acting from that mindset. So I guess this is kind of a legitimate concern that would stay with us and would be resolved somehow. I don't really know how it would be resolved.
Yep.
I mean,